Kia ora and welcome back, everybody. Hope you are all enjoying the second day of the conference so far. I'm Nuria, and it gives me great pleasure today to introduce our second keynote speaker, Jannat Maqbool. Jannat is a CPA and a former CIO with a master's in digital business from the University of Waikato, and a focus on leveraging technology in innovative ways to benefit individuals, organizations, and communities. Jannat's initial career was in financial services industry, leading mid to large-scale technology adoption initiatives, following which she spent more than a decade in tertiary education sector teaching, designing, and developing academic programs, including courseware and coordinating several collaborative projects and applied research initiatives. More recently, Jannat has been involved with initiatives supporting digital inclusion and enablement. Jannat's keynote talk today is titled AI and the Opportunity for New Zealand to Lead Rather Than Follow. So without further ado, I will now hand over the mic to Jannat. All yours.
Greetings, everybody. This is really weird. First of all, thank you for the introduction and thank you for the opportunity to be here. But it is really weird because I can't see anybody. And I just want to apologize in advance for two things in case they happen. One, if I mispronounce something, because I'm going to talk a little bit about our brand and logo and story in terms of our Artificial Intelligence Institute. And secondly, because there's only one wall between me and three children who are meant to be watching a movie and not doing anything to hurt each other or upset each other. So I apologize if they come bursting in. So let's get on with it. I'm really happy, as I said, to be here, and I'm hoping you get a lot out of the talk, and also happy to answer any questions at the end if we have time, and if you want to reach out for any additional information. So firstly, I've been asked to talk about the Artificial Intelligence Institute at the University of Waikato, but and in terms of what we're working on and who we're working with. Also have been asked to talk about the New Zealand Artificial Intelligence Researchers Association that I've been part of with a wider working group part of setting up, which should be established by the end of the year. And in terms of sort of bigger picture thinking around the opportunity, as the title alludes to, around the opportunity for New Zealand in the artificial intelligence and related spaces, based on all the things that I'm involved with. So we'll get started. Figure out how to use the computer. Right. First of all, Taiyo te Mahara. That's the name of the Artificial Intelligence Institute at the University of Waikato. And I think it's quite important that we talk a little bit about the story of the name, which in fact took quite a while to come to fruition, which is important because it indicates that actually quite a lot of time was spent coming up with the right name in Te Reo. The name is based on two keywords, Mahara and Ipu. And here's where, again, I just have to apologize if I get this wrong. I don't mean to offend. And actually, our co-director, Māori, Te Taka Keegan, is a much better person to ask about some of this detail. But Mahara itself has a number of possible meanings. It could be a memory, it could be a capture of a time and place, a form of thinking, of being. And in this instance, it is the latter meaning, arriving at a state of thinking, a state of intelligence. And Ipu, from a Waikato perspective, because the University of Waikato and Artificial Intelligence Institute based at the University of Waikato, relates to the perspective of knowledge and how it was attained when Tāwhaki ascended into the heavens, and as he was ascending into the heavens, he had to overcome a number of obstacles in his seeking of knowledge, and the knowledge that he wanted to attain. So he had to work quite hard, and he was given Ipu, which is a kind of vessel, and it has been and it can be described in a number of ways, but these vessels contained liquid, which he was able to consume and gain nourishment through to carry on his quest for knowledge. The thinking is that if we strive to build various levels of intelligence, various levels of artificial intelligence, it is this particular vessel that will give us sustenance and will nurture us and allow us to carry on. It is not meant to be specific, though, to a building or a place or a group of people, but a source of sustenance and support. So the search for higher forms of intelligence and so that can continue. And te, of course, is the, and ote is of the. So the name Te Ipu o Te Mahara roughly translates to the vessel of the arriving at a state of thinking, of intelligence. And the name actually was coined by Associate Professor Tom Roa, along with his colleagues. And we're really appreciative of that whole process and the opportunity to have this as a name for the institute. The logo itself even has a story. So the base design is a Portama design, which you can see around meeting houses around the country, and it symbolizes steps of knowledge, and the fact that you're continually moving up a step. The thinking is that your seeking of knowledge is never ending. You're constantly striving to seek knowledge, and that is what the Artificial Intelligence Institute is about, always striving to obtain new knowledge. Again, it's more than just one person. It's more than just this university, and the focus on sort of working together and sharing to obtain further knowledge. And then the designers added data points, which symbolizes different types of, for example, decision chains and just data in itself. So and the other interesting part about the Te Ipu o Te Mahara is that it's just a new name and a brand for something that's actually been, or a team of people and a reputation that is recognized internationally at the University of Waikato around our work in the machine learning space. So many of you may know, some of you might not, that we are known internationally, actually as a country. Aotearoa is known internationally for our expertise in machine learning. And in fact, for over a decade, software from Aotearoa was actually used to teach machine learning in universities around the world, and still is. And so at our launch event on the 27th of April, Professor Ian Whitton actually talked a little bit about the story, and so there are differing views on sort of when this all started, but it was the late 90s when the Weka software was first released, and now it has been downloaded more than 12.5 million times over that period, so over more than 21 years, and is still being downloaded. And so the country as a whole has an international reputation. In this space, it is not very well known that we have that reputation in terms of people here in this country. And as I sort of talk a little bit more about what we're doing and who we are and where we're sort of placed in terms of the wider ecosystem, you'll understand why the title of the talk is the opportunity for New Zealand to lead rather than follow. And I'll come back to a few of those points. Moving on, this is the team, and as I said, it is not just one team of people in one place. So it's important to mention here that we've got 24 members and 50 associate members, in fact. And so this is just a handful of our members. Even, I mean, you can imagine how hard it is. I'm pretty sure this was this was before, this was after Auckland went into lockdown again in February and March, I think it was. So it was quite difficult just to get everybody together with all the uncertainty. But yeah, we've got 24 members of the Institute, and we've got 50 associate members from around the world of the Institute. And we also work with associated groups at the University of Waikato, including the Machine Learning Group, the Waikato Robotics Automation and Sensing Group, the Applied Machine Learning Group, the MOA Lab, the Oceania Researchers in Cloud and Adaptive Systems, Cybersecurity Researchers of Waikato, and the Future Law, Technology and Society Research Group. This is the actual leadership team of the Institute. So Professor Albert Buffett, Co-Director Māori, Associate Professor Tataka Keegan, two co-directors, Professor Bernard Faringa and Professor Iber Frank, myself, and Denise, who's the Institute Manager and basically makes sure that everything runs smoothly and manages some of our bigger research projects. So that's who we are, and this is our expertise. So I'm sure all of you know what these things refer to. So machine learning, deep learning, real-time analytics, for big data actually, and open source software. And that sort of alludes to my mention before of Weka, but also if you take a look at the website, there are a number of other open source software platforms that we are developing and releasing, and I'll talk a little bit more about Weka actually, and also about a relatively new platform or open source solution that our team has been working on called River. In terms of our who we work with, so in terms, this is just some of who we work with, and so I didn't want to just put up every industry organization's logo, but to give you an idea, there's Becker, BNP Paribas, MetService, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Orange, Parkable, Smart Access, Telefonica, Waikato District Health Board, and the Waikato Regional Council. So there's a few different sort of mixes of what we do with those organizations. For example, Becker and MetService are partners on a large research project that's running over 7 years that's looking to bring together the environmental environmental science space and the data science space together. And I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. In terms of Parkable, we're working through our commercialization Waikato Link to look at how real-time analytics for big data and machine learning can be applied around smart parking, actually. And there are a number of other sort of little small initiatives outside of those large organizations that I've mentioned. We also work with associated institutes. So here is an example, Te Katahi Research Institute based at the University of Waikato. The New Zealand Institute of Security and Crime Sciences, also based at the University of Waikato, and the Environmental Research Institute, also based at the University of Waikato. With Cardiff University internationally, we work quite closely. The university works quite closely and has an existing relationship with Cardiff University. And we're working with the Data Innovation Research Institute and the Centre for Cybersecurity Research. With Scion, they are actually a collaborator on the Taiyo project, the research project that I mentioned that I'll talk about shortly. And they've got a forest flows research program. And this is a collaboration between the two quite large research programs. And so I'll talk a little bit about that shortly also. So our approach is quite important, I think, to cover. So we've had decades worth of experience and have a reputation in the space of machine learning. We've got a real set of expertise in a number of areas: machine learning, deep learning, real-time analytics for big data, and open source software. Number of collaborators, a number of members, number of associate members from around the world, and a number of industry organizations and other companies that we work with. But we were really careful to not try and do everything and to actually even step into spaces that wouldn't really leverage our expertise and for the wider ecosystem not make as much impact as we potentially could in other areas if we just maintained a certain amount of focus and had a real understanding of the approach we were going to take. So approach is interdisciplinary, and we're really big on working together, which is what the brand and our name Te Ipu o Te Mahara also, as I mentioned around the story, also brings into focus. So as a team, real-time analytics for big data, machine learning, deep learning, and open source software. And our goal outside of, I guess, research, education, and industry engagement, and the software is just to build greater awareness, in Aotearoa, and actually the building of a talent pipeline for around also developing AI, but just more around an understanding of its application in different disciplines. And so that we can, as a country, truly benefit people and planet when it comes to the opportunity that artificial intelligence presents, and that we can include everyone, or at least provide the opportunity for everyone to be included in the conversation and the co-design of products and services and the use of products and services, for example. So as a country, and I'll talk a little bit about this shortly as well, but as a country, artificial intelligence has been identified as an enabler, and there's a whole strategy and approach behind that. And so that's a conversation that's been happening for I'd say probably at least a couple of years, potentially around what does the digital technologies industry and an industry transformation look like, transformation plan for Aotearoa look like. So what we thought was, what can we do in this space? And so what we're about is that raising of awareness, the building of talent, and encouraging greater collaboration, both between and within the tertiary sector, but also between the tertiary sector and other research organizations, and then research itself and industry to contribute to that AI ecosystem in New Zealand. And so therefore, as an organization and a group of people, we often talk about being inclusive and collaborative, leading edge and innovative, and impactful across disciplines. So from a research perspective, I talked about research, software, education, and industry engagement being our key sort of the key, I would say, pillars of our approach. So research in terms of research leadership and developing skills for our researchers, and also ensuring that they have the time to focus on, alongside their more academic commitments, they actually have the time to focus on being research active. In terms of software, our focus is open source, and that's around that generating awareness and enabling greater access to artificial intelligence for all communities. And actually the tools being quite reliable and secure is another part of that, the focus on software. As I mentioned, we're the leading developers of Weka, but there is obviously other software platforms as well. MOA, I alluded to the MOA Lab in our associated groups, and Atoms as well. But if you want more information on those, there's a lot of information on our website. And again, just alluding to the fact that, the idea of open source is that everybody has this opportunity to get hands-on. And actually, Weka is designed for people that aren't programmers, actually, so for non-technical people, really. In terms of industry, and this is the important one, this is the one that I was sort of more alluding to when I said, we're not going to try and do everything, and we're not going to try and step into spaces where we can't make as much impact as others potentially could, and which take away from other areas that we could have a greater impact in. So with industry, where one of our research programs is under the Entrepreneurial Universities Initiative from the previous government. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit more detail later. But the idea is to support the building of capacity across industry. And when we were looking at an approach around that, apart from sort of the more research-focused areas, we're looking at where we can really add value. And so the approach we're taking is to firstly support organizations to understand where they are at when it comes to their AI maturity. Now, that's not a new concept. Like if you Google that, you'll see that there's been a number of reports, even in New Zealand, I believe, a number of big consulting companies have talked about AI maturity. There are a number of frameworks around the world. There are a number of initiatives running around the world. AI Singapore, for example, has a whole program around understanding or evaluating your AI maturity and understanding what a roadmap would look like for an organization and supporting them. So we're really looking at an organization from the perspective of data and analytics, but tools and technology, which includes infrastructure and data infrastructure, people and skills, strategies, and whether they're actually embedding AI in their overall business strategy, but also what about a strategy around AI, and what is actually required to move from a point of having data or wanting to collect data or at the verge of collecting data and actually being able to analyze the data and come up with some useful decisions and run some and identify use cases to develop relevant models. So it's quite a long spectrum there. So, and also lastly around governance. So what sort of governance structures and strategies has the organization thought of and got in place around data? And obviously that alludes to privacy and security and ethics, but also just generally in terms of data governance. So depending on the level of maturity, we then have a number of opportunities for organizations to engage with Taiyo Te Mahara. And our team and our students and wider within our sort of associate members around the world and wider with respect to our associate groups and associate institutes, but also across other parts and areas of the university, just going back to that thinking around being impactful across disciplines. And I won't go into detail around those, but the idea being that we're really sort of thinking about an approach that would work for industry and it's a sustainable approach where industry is actually building capability and which starts with awareness and knowledge as opposed to just for example running projects sort of on a more ad hoc basis, which has its place also in terms of testing and finding out more about the potential. And then the other areas, so I've covered research, software, industry engagement, and the other one is obviously education. So one of the opportunities that industry has to engage with our institute is through professional development programs. And the other one, more specifically, is a new Masters of Science in AI that we are hopefully going to be able to release in 2022. Moving along. So again, I'm not going to talk about everything that we do, but there was some interest in us, or me rather, talking about some of the, more specifically about some of the things that we're doing here at the Institute. So Taiyo, I've alluded to in its abbreviated state, which is probably the best way to talk about this project, because I'll tell you, it's quite a mouthful. So it's the time evolving data science / artificial intelligence for advanced open environmental science platform. So this is a rather large research project led by the University of Waikato, and we're in our second of 7 years rather, and it's funded by MB. And what we're looking to do, as I mentioned, is advancing the state of the art when it comes to environmental data science by developing, and this is where I'll go into a little bit more detail, developing new machine learning methods for time series and data streams that are able to deal with large quantities of big data. So going back to the real-time analytics for big data. And the idea is that it's tailored to the New Zealand environment. And so the reality is, and we talk about this in media, because there was a lot of media stories that the Institute put out as we were going through this process of launching, and we talk about the need for New Zealand to actually build talent and awareness of AI so we can build our own models, because it isn't always going to work, and it isn't in a number of cases, just applying models that are developed overseas. And an example of that is just the fact that New Zealand, in terms of its location between the oceans, the lack of infrastructure across the country, the fact that we're two mainlands, and where we are positioned globally, we've got weather systems and weather patterns and a inability to collect, I guess, like some countries, data at every single point that's relevant across the landscape. So we really need to be able to build our own models. And a more recent example of that, and I'm not sure if this impacted any of you, but in Hamilton, like, I don't even know how long ago it was, but like weeks, I'd imagine it was, our power ran out. Like, so we were actually there was no power for like an hour and a half or something. I know in the first world it sounds like a real, it's a first world problem, but the reality is, if we're going to rely more and more on renewable energy, then we have to be better at predicting the weather and actually being able to understand wind and other weather, and be able to generate power based on demand, and actually be able to better manage and understand demand. So basically, to apply AI, and that's just one example, to better connect demand and supply when it comes to energy. And also in terms of energy, be more efficient. So one of the research projects or areas of interest of our researchers, for example, is how can algorithms run more efficiently so they use less compute, which means less of a footprint when it comes to data centers and running analytics on compute. So yeah, so that's the Taiyo project. So it's actually a platform. So if you go to Taiyo, TAIAO.ai, you will see the current version of the platform, but later this year we'll be releasing a new version of the Taiyo platform. And even on the one that's live, you can see different organizations and stakeholders working together, collaborating. You can see Jupyter notebooks being used there to, in terms of that focus on open source, and able to so people can actually see what are the models doing, or understand a bit more around that concept of explainable AI is a big part of a lot of what we do. And when the new platforms launch, there will be a wider call to say, other organizations, other entities, other groups, bring your data here to the platform, run the analytics, develop your own notebooks, share your thinking, share your data. So have a look at that if you're interested at all. And if you've got any questions, I'm pretty sure there's some contact information on that platform as well. The project is a collaboration between the University of Waikato, University of Canterbury, University of Auckland, Becker, and Met Service. In terms of user-friendly deep learning, it's another one. I alluded to our expertise in terms of deep learning. So this project the goal of this project is to enable domain experts to apply deep learning without involving a machine learning expert and without requiring any programming. So again, that whole focus on being inclusive and collaborative and accessible. Another project that I can mention is AI around human-centric security, and I mentioned that we have an associated group called the Cybersecurity Researchers of Waikato. So this is a collaboration between Te Upu o Te Mahara and the Crow group. And it's the project is actually led by Dr. Vimal Kumar of Crow. And the teams include University of Auckland and University of Otago, Monash University and the University of Queensland, and in fact Data 61 in Australia as well. So what that one is looking to do is to use AI to aid human security experts in managing configuration in a diverse environment. So follow that one if you have an interest there. And in terms of industry, yeah, one of the I mentioned the EU initiative, and so the focus of the Entrepreneurial Universities initiative, which is what has had us thinking about our approach with industry around firstly assessing their AI maturity and then and then discussing a number of options that might be relevant to that organization in terms of engagement with the institute, but also generally just in following their own roadmap and providing sort of advice on what they need to be looking at. For example, in some cases, it's just that they just don't have their data ready or their data architecture, or they actually have to do a lot of work in the data engineering space. And we've come across that actually with not just small organizations, but quite large organizations as well, which is really interesting. So the research program, the EU initiative, is focusing on addressing two key questions. How can we make deployable machine learning technology available to the wider business and government communities in Aotearoa so they can benefit from the age of big data? And I don't know if you realize, but there are a number of conversations going on around data in this country at the moment. So there's the consumer data right announcement recently. There's the new initiative that's being rolled out around supporting businesses to be able to be in a position to drive decision making using data. There is the Open Finance research project that's being led to have a look at what the opportunity around open banking, open finance, open data is for New Zealand. And so, yeah, there's a number of things happening in the ecosystem, and so this is really relevant in the sense that, you know, building capacity and knowledge in businesses. And the other part of the EU initiative project is, are we able to, and this is, I guess, the more research focused component, can we develop data streaming methods that scale to big data, like large deep neural networks, but that work well in a number of domains, because going back to that whole point of being accessible. In terms of software, that's the Weka logo, because Weka actually, obviously, you all know, is a bird. And so I've mentioned that one. I don't think I need to go into any more detail than that, except that, yeah, it's pretty well known internationally. It's easy to jump on and play. And watch this space, because we're doing a few things around Weka in the upcoming future. The software that I do want to mention is the logo in the middle. So that's River. And it's around machine learning for data streams in Python. So it's a Python package for online streaming machine learning, and it caters for different machine learning models, including regression, classification, unsupervised learning, and can be used for ad hoc tasks. All the tools in the library can be updated with a single observation at a time, and can therefore be used to process streaming data, which is a key area of expertise of our team. And in the stream setting, data can evolve, and so adaptive methods are specifically, you know, you can design the adaptive methods enable the models to attack or to deal with concept drift in a dynamic environment. So, and it's designed for users with any experience level. So again, back to that whole concept of being inclusive, being collaborative, enabling access to AI in terms of that having a real impact across people and planet. Have a look at our website if you're interested in finding out more about the Te Upu o Te Mahara and the work that we do and who we work with, and what we're sort of looking to do and have on offer around events and education. So moving now on to probably what you're more interested in is what's happening in the wider ecosystem. I'm just keeping an eye on time. the wider ecosystem in New Zealand. So the government, as I mentioned, the Digital Technologies Industry Transformation Plan, that conversation started at least a couple of years ago. And so this is from the current draft of the Digital Technologies ITP for short, it's called. So you'll see there that artificial intelligence alongside Māori tech success and growing more export firms has been identified as an enabling growth engine for the country. And you'll see that the mention of data and data-driven innovation, you'll see that down there in the data block in terms of a good foundation, and you'll see skills there as well. And so the government is also working on a national AI strategy. There's also a digital strategy that will actually be, at this stage, be taken to cabinet end of the month, and then out for consultation in October. So there are a number of things coming together in terms of that are relevant to the AI ecosystem in New Zealand. And as we sort of got more involved in this last year, we realized that actually there was quite a gap in terms of where was the, not a focus, but where was this consideration of the research ecosystem. And so probably would have been October last year, as we were sort of formalizing the launch of Te Upo Te Mahara, we got together with a number of people from other universities and had a few Zoom calls, and we said, is there an opportunity to better connect the AI research ecosystem in New Zealand? And the feeling was yes, but it was really important that we were very inclusive in that conversation and what the approach looked like. So one of the first things actually that we did was come together as a smaller group and provide some input onto the then draft artificial intelligence strategy for Aotearoa. And it's had a few iterations since. I haven't seen a draft of late, but it's not due for release till sometime next year to have it all sort of come out in order, the digital tech ITP, the digital strategy, and then the AI strategy. But what we did, and so going, we needed to have more people involved in the conversation. And so the first thing we did, the University of Waikato hosted a workshop, which we're hoping will be an annual occasion that the new association can take care of. So we actually got everybody together for the New Zealand workshop on artificial intelligence research at Hobbiton, and actually there was quite a lot of excitement to go to Hobbiton. And I haven't even seen Lord of the Rings, let alone read them. So for me, it was pretty like the food was all right. But I only emceed the session, obviously. But the idea was that there was an opportunity to get together. Obviously, after what had happened last year and the start of this year, people were really keen to get together in person, so that was great. But I'll let the video do more of the sort of what happened. So hopefully this will work for everybody. Just. So that was the start of, or actually just before, so that show of hands that you saw in the video was actually after 2 lots of over 1 hour long discussions with the group that was there to see if there was interest in something like this. A group that would connect our artificial intelligence research community across the country. True, everybody wasn't represented there at the time. We were actually limited by venue capacity, which was unfortunate, but everybody wanted to have it at Hobbiton. So anyway, that was the start. That was the hand up to say, yep, let's do something. So the call for membership went out the week after. We now have 306 members, and the New Zealand Artificial Intelligence Researchers Association is being established as a not-for-profit representative body established to support the production and dissemination of artificial intelligence research. The idea being that we connect, support, and provide a voice for the artificial intelligence research community with all of its subdisciplines to position New Zealand as a front runner internationally in leveraging this transformational technology to benefit society. This is the team. A call for nominations went out after the first lot of membership, the first membership round. So there was 261 members at the time. So this is the executive committee that was voted in with 2 appointments, though. Professor Albert Biffett was appointed to secretary because there were no nominations for that seat. And Associate Professor Tataka Keegan is a interim tangata whenua representative, and he is actually working with Māori members of the association to have a tangata whenua representative appointed, and what that looks like and whatever the process is around that. So but we are also currently going through a process of expanding the governance group, because we wanted to make sure, or the executive committee, the voted in executive committee wanted to make sure that the governance group was representative of the membership. So there are a couple of 2 or 3 new additions coming to the group. And whilst we finalize our constitution, which is already also underway, and then set up as an incorporated society with charitable status, the website and the branding and all that is happening as well. So watch this space. The idea is that when we next month, and I'll explain what we're doing next month is to do with the association shortly. So this is the role of the association: supporting AI research by organising events, promoting collaborative work, and drawing attention, providing visibility to AI research in New Zealand, and providing a voice. Once the website's up, you'll be able to sort of have a look a little bit more at what that looks like. And so it was so as I mentioned, the association will run that annual conference. It will be in the South Island next year for 2022. So watch out for that one if you're keen. But in terms of providing a voice, I guess the first activity that we ran as a group, albeit a smaller group, was at providing feedback on the initial at that time draft of the National AI Strategy. And what came out of that was that the working group identified that there was an opportunity to present a white paper back to government on the topic of the New Zealand Artificial Intelligence Strategy. So the first formal activity of the association is actually a white paper that we released for draft on the 4th of August, and it was out for consultation until the 25th, I believe, of August, and now is just being finalized, and we'll go to the designers over the next couple of weeks, and will come out publicly next month. So I can't tell you exactly what the research paper covers, obviously. Sorry, the white paper covers. But what it does is, as you can imagine, it talks about AI research in New Zealand and the depth actually of our international reputation and collaboration as a group. It talks about AI in the national context. It talks about what's happening overseas in terms of AI strategies and approaches. Talks about our uniqueness and in the importance of a focus on data sovereignty and Mataranga Māori. And it actually has a number of recommendations, of which some allude to why there is a need to invest more effectively and in terms of dollars in the into AI research for New Zealand and the associated sort of parts of the ecosystem that need to come together as well through investment. So watch this space. It will come out. Covers a number of things. That's the first activity of the association. So the interesting thing about all of what I've talked about, the research, the reputation that we have, the research areas that us that the group at the Taiyo or Te Mahara is focused on, the fact that we've got research depth in this country across the ecosystem, the fact that there's a lot going on in terms of a wider conversation around AI at a national level. I just want to go back to the point of this talk, which was the opportunity for New Zealand. And I know this isn't really about AI, but at a talk that I gave recently, I pulled up this slide, which is actually from the Aotearoa Circle and their sustainable finance forum, which I think is now a center. And so this one, and I talked about at that event, the fact that there's so many things going on and so many initiatives looking at data and sharing data and what that needs and security and privacy. I mentioned the consumer data right. I mentioned the open finance project, a research project. I mentioned, there are a lot of other things going on that some of them I can't even talk about. But suffice to say, like, for example, in the Waikato, there's the Waikato Wellbeing Project, which is looking at the SDGs from a regional level and setting targets and then leveraging technology and data through a platform. And that obviously, will need a consideration of security, privacy, but it also at some point will need to run analytics. There's the Forest Flows program that's come together with the Taiyo program. The Forest Flows program is an MB funded program. There's a lot of, there's tons of terrestrial data and data being collected with data loggers across 6 or 7 sites across this country. We'll have to think of how algorithms run on the edge. We'll have to think about, at the moment, the team at Forest Flows is looking at leveraging Kafka and what some data engineering and architecture looks like in terms of connecting, the ability to sort of connect to the Taiyo platform. What that looks like in terms of models and the ability and the opportunity that presents around models for New Zealand. And so if you look at this picture, what this one talks about is this opportunity for everything to come together, underpinned by some infrastructure, but also with those pillars, especially around some of the considerations that we have to have in place to do with, key focus areas for the country, for example, climate change, but also in terms of the risks and things like that. So just something to think about. I presented it at that conference, Surveying Spatial New Zealand, and it was sort of a call to action to everybody that was there to go, go digital. Everybody's going digital, but actually have a think about what a collaboration across sectors and disciplines could look like for this country and the impact that we can make across a number of areas. For people and planet. So that is from the Sustainable Finance Forum, as I mentioned. So in short, there is an opportunity for New Zealand. I hope I have, through this talk, raised some awareness amongst this group around why I think, and not just myself, a number of people, the research ecosystem, for example. There's a number of stories in the news from the leadership of Te Mahara, talking about that. There are a number of other people talking about that, and there are a number of conversations going on that need to connect. So and if you want to find out more about the Institute, ai.waikato.ac.nz, want to find out about anything else that I've mentioned, I think they're going to share the presentation, but otherwise get in touch. And thank you very much for your time. I think we have time for some questions. But
yes, thank you, Jannat. That was very interesting and definitely raised a great awareness, especially for me. And it's great to hear about all this activity that's happening in the space and all these amazing plans. So if you have any questions for Jannat, please feel free to post them in the live Q&A tab. And while we give everyone the time to type their questions, I have a quick, and it's quite a broad question, so I don't know if we'll be able to cover everything, but you mentioned there are many groups from various institutions that you're already working with, building collaborations with. What is the aspiration of the AI Institute in terms of scale and scope?
Okay, so Te Ipu o Te Mahara is the institute based at the University of Waikato. When we were going through the process of putting a brand on, like I said, the decades of experience and reputation that the university already had in this space, we went out to the researchers ecosystem and said what more could be done to connect the ecosystem. So yes, one of the things on the cards was the fact that there could be an institute for New Zealand. That would be a connection of the different groups that were there's a lab at there's labs and groups and centres. There's a centre in Otago University, for example. There are a number of groups at Canterbury, Massey. Every university is doing something. And then the makeup of the association of the 306 members is actually all 8 universities and all CRIs as well. So there's quite a lot of activity. And so, yes, we did allude to at the start as a group, a small working group, could it be a virtual institute and maybe one university hosted it 1 year or for 2 years? And actually it was a collaboration of all the associated groups and labs and centres and other institutes across the country in the universities. We never progressed that one. And so where we landed was an association of researchers. So it's a membership from across the research from the institutions and organizations of the research ecosystem, including private ones. But that association is not a collaboration of universities and Crown Research Institutes and stuff. So there is an opportunity for New Zealand to do that bigger picture, connecting it all. But for now, the associated groups that Te Ipu o Te Mahara works with are the associated groups based at the University of Waikato or the associated institutes that were already signed MOUs with or we're collaborating with. So, there's a number of MOUs that are in the works as well, and there's a couple that we have signed that we're not releasing publicly at the moment. But to suffice to say, I alluded to it when I talked about our brand and our logo and our story behind the choosing of the name. We are looking at it as an opportunity for this country. We are looking at what collaboration and more inclusive collaboration could look like. We are not looking to do everything. It has to be a coming together of like-minded individuals and organizations. And I think that's what we have with the association and very much so with the associate members and the members and the associated groups and the associated institutes of Te Ipu o Te Mahara at the University of Waikato. Thank you for the question.
Great, thank you. So we've got a couple of questions and I'm just going to read them out. So in your opinion, to what extent should ethical advisory around the usage of AI inform Parliament legislation so that New Zealand can have an enforceable baseline to stir research activities?
Okay, so there are a couple of things in there. So firstly, we have to understand what ethics is from the perspective of the diverse communities in New Zealand. And many of you might have heard what's good for Māori is good for everybody. And so we really need to take a hard look at what we mean by ethics. So in some cases we've taken models and frameworks from overseas, and just like in other just like in regard to other models around AI, we need to be able to come up with our own thinking in that space. So that's one. And secondly, we need it so that, yes, we can inform the use of and regulation around and policies to do with the application of AI and research around AI. But the important thing there is also that you need to leave some room for what research really is. Research is pushing the boundaries around to see what is possible. But if we have that sound framework around what ethics really means for the benefit of people and planet, I think we'll be quite safe. The other thing to keep in mind there is that even if we've got policies and frameworks, we've understood and we agree on the what does ethics mean for people and planet, we are applying that framework when it comes to leveraging artificial intelligence, developing artificial intelligence, research in that space. But the part that's important is that we need to be transparent in the fact that we're doing so. So whoever it is that's doing it needs to be able to explain what's happening in that black box. They need to be able to explain who they've consulted, when did they consult them, how does the ethics framework apply, if there's been a divergence, what was that about? And so it's not enough to put effort into developing a framework and a policy and then popping it on a shelf and being referenced in papers and referenced in conversations and referenced in work plans without there being real evidence and transparency around the application of such a framework, but actually that ongoing conversation, because again, you can't just pop it on a shelf and say, oh, okay, we've done that. It actually is an ongoing conversation, and that collaboration needs to continue. That ability for that, what I would say, inclusive innovation, so inclusive research needs to be there for this country, and actually for the world. We've got a real opportunity. We've done it in other areas where we're actually led.
Great, thank you for an awesome question, Eric. We have a couple more. So we have a question from Roland. He says, sorry, I may have missed this in the talk as I had to step out, but what I heard, I loved. My question is, what was or is the biggest challenge in balancing AI uptake in industry with balancing the social good and handling bias in data?
The biggest challenge is the lack of understanding. So I mentioned it a little bit. You didn't miss much in terms of what I said, I think, because I didn't go into it deep enough. But there's data and there's data that's relevant for machine learning, right? So first of all, people think they've got a lot of data and that it's ready to deploy machine learning on. And so that's one part of it. So actually the challenge around understanding what is actually machine learning and AI and what it actually requires and what's possible now. And it's not like what's in the movies. So what is it? What is it not? Where are we at? Who's doing what? So being really, open and sharing, who's at what stage, collaborating more so we can connect, not duplicate effort, but more aligned effort together. But really grassroots is what data is required and how you're able to collate that data and how you should be able to collate the data and everything that goes along with the right to be able to use that data. That in fact there's a real lack of understanding and appreciation for the fact that just because you have it doesn't mean it's yours. Just because it's yours at the time doesn't mean that it's always yours. And so there's that real lack of understanding around. So I mentioned the fact that there's a lot of work going on around businesses being able to, I guess, deploy more data-driven innovation. But there's a back step to that, which actually is what is data, who has rights to data, how are you able to collect data, how you should be able to collect data, what is a big no, and then actually that what is machine learning and what can you do with the data, and then there's the gap in between, which is where the conversation around data engineering, data architecture, data infrastructure comes in. So when we look at an organization's AI, readiness for AI, so the readiness index is what the AI Singapore alludes to it, and we've just, through a number of conversations with industry and our researchers and wider around the ecosystem, we've realized that we need to have a look at the data. We need to have a look at data infrastructure. We need to look at people and skills. We need to have a look at strategies. We need to have a look at governance. But the big one is that first one, that there's a lack of understanding and appreciation for what's required around data and all the rules that come with that. And just a lack of understanding as to what that then means in terms of machine learning and AI. I hope that answers your question. Sorry, a bit of a roundabout sort of way.
No, that was a really interesting outlook. So could you, the next question here is, could you see this institute as a way to reach out to other countries that may want to increase maturity in this space, such as ones in Southeast Asia and the Pacific?
We're already talking to a number of organizations, and actually we get approached by international companies more than we actually get approached by New Zealand companies because of their reputation of the University of Waikato. So you know, just some of the big ones, but even just small ones through the connections that we have with our 50 associate members. I think that it could, but like I said, just going back to the start is we do see this as a Te Upu o Te Mahara as an opportunity to bring together like-minded individuals in this pursuit of higher knowledge and intelligence, and the Institute being a vessel for that. But we are not wanting to do everything. We want to be able to you know, align with the rest of the ecosystem. That was the idea of the association. That is the idea of when we're involved with a number of conversations at a national level around the wider AI ecosystem and positioning of not just Te Upu o Te Mahara, but also the Researchers Association, but also where does it sit with everybody else in the ecosystem. So the view is really NZRSE, but I can tell you, and the person that asked the question and the audience, that for a number of reasons, even before COVID, even before what happened in Christchurch, even before what's happening with, you know, a number of areas, this country was looked at as leaders in machine learning, and we can get back there, and we are there in a number of areas. And I think there's a real opportunity. If we're getting so much interest internationally, then there must be an opportunity. And it's not just us. Like when we wrote the white paper, there are pages and pages there of international collaborations that are already connecting with universities in the ecosystem here in New Zealand. We are being asked for advice and input and thought leadership and co-design of research programs and research with a number of countries and organizations around the world, not just between academic institutions, but actually at a governance level and from industry.
Great. And lastly, we have a question from Joseph, who says, given the UN's recent call for a moratorium on AI that threatens human rights, that what frameworks and procedures can be implemented so that AI tools are fair, equitable, ethical, etc., and for the genuine betterment of society and the planet?
So let me just say at this point that I'm not an AI person, but I'll tell you what I think and what I've gathered. Okay, so from what I know, AI needs data to train the model. Then the model needs to be tested. Then the model is deployed on a new set of data. So obviously, what you train, it's like a child. If you keep it in an environment and it only learns certain things, and then you throw it in an environment that it's not used to, it doesn't know how to act. It can make mistakes, or it can be thinking that it's making the right decisions and the right choices because it's coming from a base that actually didn't provide exposure and doesn't realize, actually the child doesn't realize that actually the real world isn't like the way that the child was used to. So one thing that comes to mind is obviously the explainability concept and the transparency that I alluded to before, and being accountable for what's going on and being able to provide evidence of what's going on in the black box. But the most important thing for me is, and when you watch, like I'm old enough to remember Terminator, the original one, and I watch lots of other sci-fi things every now and again. And there's two things. So what we need is trusted sources and reliable information and access to experts that can really tell people, and I mean everybody of the people, so reach into communities, make them more aware of what this is, and what they need to know about what it is and what it isn't, and what they need to consider in becoming a user, but also the opportunity to be at the table when it comes to designing and developing. And that should be through co-creation and actually co-creating the table as well. So being really inclusive. But so that's the people and awareness thing. But the other element is keeping the human in the loop. So one of the professors at the university talks about that, and human in the loop. And I think that's fundamental. So I think we missed the fact that, so the data gets ingested, the data is looked at and analyzed, the model is designed and developed, the data is pulled in, it is tested to see if the model has done what it needs to be, and then it's deployed on another model. That human element is fundamental. And the most important part about the human element is that it should be humans that reflect the diversity of humanity.
Fantastic. What a great way to end the session. And so I just want to thank you again, Jannat, for your time and for being our keynote speaker this year. So for everyone else, we now have a 10-minute break followed by our next presentation session on research software. So we'll see you at 2:10. Thank you once again, Jannat.
Thank you very much, everybody.